Hi there, welcome back to another conversation with myself, Scott Brennan, and Ray Simpson.
Hi everyone.
Ray and I are once again in the prayer room on the holy island of Lindisfarne. This prayer room is used by the community of Aidan and Hilda, and it's just great to be here. And Ray, we've had a number of conversations around the waymarks. In fact, you've got a flyer here talking about the community of Aidan and Hilda and this whole idea of how do we live this out in the modern world, and these posts on the causeway just are sort of, they're a symbol, aren't they?
They are.
What do you think of when you think of them as a symbol?
Well, they point the direction you're to walk in, and if you go far off them, you could get into one of those sand things where you slip. You go, down
You
into
get your
the sand.
wellies stuck.
Yeah, and then there's, but at the same time, there's part of the journey where you've got quite sharp shells and a lot of black stuff. So it's not all sunshine. It's quite, there are
Yes.
different parts of the terrain, but the posts help you to get through to the end.
So that's why we've been talking about waymarks.
Yeah.
As a kind of trellis or a way to guide us through the spiritual life. And previously, Ray, we've talked about journey,
We have.
and we've talked about soul friends and how soul friends help as part of that journey. We've talked about rhythms and the life-giving principles. We've talked about all those kind of things. But today we thought we'd have a discussion about what kind of things will help us and aid us on the journey. And what are you thinking of in particular?
Well, there are two things in the way of life that we mention, and one is retreats. You need to
Okay.
retreat in order to advance, and the second is pilgrimage.
Right. Okay. Well, let's begin with retreats then, and for the sake of maybe someone who's watching this or for the first time or doesn't know what a retreat, what you mean by a retreat, because it can sound negative in some way, like, oh, I'm retreating, I'm stepping back. So, do you want to give us an indication of a sort of definition of what do you mean by a retreat?
A retreat means that we step off the treadmill
Okay.
and we allocate priority time to be away from all the things we get addicted to in terms of busyness, social media, this, that, and the other, and really. Jesus went on retreats regularly, went up mountains to a garden, to lonely places. And the great religions recommend retreats. So the Jews, for example, have the festival of booths or shelters. And they make a little hut with an open roof. In the Middle East, it's better than in Britain. So you're open to the skies. And you're outside your own house. It could be in a garden or a field, and for once a year in October you are open to God in creation and thinking your own thoughts, thinking God's thoughts, but not being weighed down by 101 other things. That's part of the Jewish recommendation for retreats, and Jesus often said to his friends, "Come away with me."
And actually, within the Jewish tradition, they had a number of festivals, didn't they?
They did.
That functioned like retreats.
Yes, they were.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right. Yes. And Jesus said, if you can't afford to go anywhere, go into your own room and shut the door. But it was vital for him, and he said in the Father's what's to come, I'm going to have like the trade routes where you have these lodging places, and in my Father's mansion there'd be lodging places for every person.
Yes.
So
yes.
he wanted us to have a life that's revolving around the idea of the rhythm of output and input.
It's kind of like breathing in and breathing out, isn't
That's
it?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So a retreat is often it's got a geographical element to it. So it's not necessarily getting away, but there is a benefit to getting away, isn't there?
Yes, in our modern packed society, a lot of people find it's necessary to get away from their telephone, and everybody's wanting the beck and call. And people who can afford it might go to retreat houses, For people who can't afford it, you can go to a caravan site or go tenting or just go out to a park somewhere. But getting away for several days has a lot to recommend it. And we in the community of Aidan and Hilda run organised retreats regularly for different kinds of people.
And we also have retreat houses.
We do.
Yes,
We have
yeah.
retreat houses, yes.
Yeah. And our retreat houses have also an emphasis on welcoming people to come and just get away. So that's great. That's great. And also the thing about retreat is you said retreat to advance. Do you want to maybe unpack what do you mean by that?
Well, there's a business guy in New Zealand who's not necessarily a Christian, but he has all his workforce have to go on a retreat because he say we will not advance if we don't learn to retreat, because you get overwhelmed by the pressure of the urgent and the immediate, and stop having clear long-term goals.
Okay.
So I think that's another aspect of retreat.
Do you mean it's about perspective?
Perspective, sifting
Yeah.
what's the true from the false,
Yeah.
the long-term important things from the urgent things.
And so it's setting aside time, space,
Yes,
place,
yes,
and so that your mind isn't so distracted by the things that normally make demands.
That's right.
Is that what you mean?
and the first day of a retreat can be offloading stuff that's on your mind and filling your head.
Yeah, I find that when I used to come to Holy Island to go and retreat, it would take me 24 hours
Yes,
because my head was just full of all this, the stuff that was
That's right.
there. I had to detox almost.
that's right.
Yeah.
And in the Celtic tradition, they also have what they call vigils, so that the 40 days before Christmas, 40 days before Easter, and 40 days before Pentecost, after Pentecost, were all times of vigil. And as often as not, they go out into wild places or lonely places and chill out with God.
Yeah.
So they
yeah.
make it a regular habit.
Yeah, so here on Holy Island, there's a little other island called Cuthbert's Island,
There is.
and that was his tradition, wasn't it? Was
Yep.
to not only was he part of the community here, but he also went off to Holy Island, and then when that got too much for him, he went off to the Farne Islands, didn't he?
Our community started in Norway after Tom Martin Bernsen came on a boat. He sailed here, but he spent the night on Cuthbert's Island. By the way, if you do that, you've got to tell the
Coast Guard, yeah.
But he spent the night on Cuthbert's Island, and he said, God's spoken to me. You've got to come to a lighthouse bed and breakfast in Norway. And that's how our community began there.
Wow.
Because he had this clear vision from God.
And so the retreat allows your spirit to connect with God's spirit
Yeah.
without these distractions.
That's right.
And unless you build it in as a rhythm, then we just kind of drift. That seems to be the
Yes.
way, doesn't it?
I mean, sometimes we have a organised retreat on a theme, and sometimes people come to read. Very often journaling, if you can write, you write down stuff you want to offload, but then you get to the thoughts that might be God speaking to you, inspired thoughts, and you can write all this stuff down.
Yes. And so there's a discernment element to it, isn't there?
There is a discernment element.
Yeah, so
yes.
going on retreat gives you the space to actually figure out what's my thoughts, what's God's thoughts,
Yes.
or other kind of
Yeah.
influences.
I mean, the last thing Jesus did was go on, before he started his ministry, he went on a retreat for 40 days. The last thing he did was go up a mountain and get 2 or 3 of his friends to be his great support for the ordeal that was coming to him. And there
Yes.
he had this amazing experience of Moses and Elijah coming. We can't have that every day, but we can have transliminal experiences.
Yes.
Yeah,
And before he made important decisions, he went away, and like before he chose the 12.
he did.
So it's in that kind of principle, isn't it?
Yeah. Because so much of God's work is run by workaholics.
And we think we've got good ideas,
Yes.
but actually not that great.
and I can be a workaholic, and so I need to get away from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that takes me on to the second thing in terms of journey. So we talked about retreats, but you also mentioned to me pilgrimages.
Yes.
So do you want to explain to me what you mean by that?
Well, the Christian religion started at a pilgrimage when people from many, many nations came to the Pentecost pilgrimage in Jerusalem.
Right.
And the whole theme...
And that was part of the Pentecost festival.
It was.
Yeah.
And the whole theme of the Old Testament and the God choosing the Jews was the obedience of Abraham on a mountain offering his only son. That incredible act of obedience led them to build eventually a temple on that site.
Mm-hmm.
And then it became a place of pilgrimage, and Psalms of Ascent in our Psalms in the Bible are the pilgrimage songs.
They would say them on the way.
They sang as they went up the steps to that pilgrim place. So the whole of the Old Testament is based on pilgrimage, and that place is based on utter obedience to God and the wonderful things that come out of obedience to God.
Right.
And I think so. The Christian Church, the Psalm Pentecostal minister came here who'd never been taught about retreats and didn't believe in them, but he read in the Psalms, "Blessed are those who go on pilgrimage." So he started walking from the south of England up to Lindisfarne because he said, "I've got to go on retreat on a pilgrimage."
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things we do on a pilgrimage is we can go to a place made holy by a saint and live into that. So
this is the destination point.
The destination point,
right.
Yes. We can go to the Holy Land, Bethlehem, Jerusalem. We can go to Rome. If we're in Africa, we can go to the places the Holy Family visited in Egypt. If we're in Asia, we can go to Ephesus, Patmos Island, where John went. Mm-hmm. And if we're in the Americas, there are a whole lot of holy places. And the same in Australia and beyond. Uluru is a place made holy through God coming to people through creation.
Yeah. And interestingly, Pete Gregg came to Holy Island recently, and he had travelled over, I think it was 3 months on foot from Iona to Holy Island. That was that was a pilgrimage.
Yes, that was a pilgrimage. Gosh, it's quite a walk.
Yeah, that's a long way, isn't it?
So you're walking out. When you begin a pilgrimage, you may be walking out of your system, overload and worries and this, that and the other. But you also are on a level with other people. And of course, not everybody's a Christian on a pilgrimage these days. Loads of people do it. But you learn from one another.
There was a TV programme recently about celebrities going on pilgrimages, and they were kind of discovering themselves.
They were discovering themselves.
Yeah.
But we're keen that we discover God as well as ourselves.
That's right.
We've got to discover both.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so
what do we do on a pilgrimage?
Yeah, what do we do? Yeah, what are we going to do?
Well, I mean, some people, Muslims, when they arrive, make a prayer of dedication to God. Some Muslims also throw stones at the devil. And that's a good Christian thing to do, throw stones at the devil, so long as you don't demonise a person. But a guy who came to the island took a stone for everything he wanted to get rid of in his life, or every person he hated, and he threw it into the sea.
Interesting.
And he walked around the island throwing stones into the sea.
It's like a sort of prophetic enactment.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think if there's a place is being made holy by a person of great prayer or sanctity, we learn more about them, we sense their presence, and we somehow imbibe something of that spirit.
So that's something of the idea of a thin place, isn't it?
A thin place,
where heaven and earth somehow seems closer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we become thin people.
Yes.
Because it's no good going to a thin place and going back to just as we were before. We've got to be more a thin person.
Right. Yeah. So you can carry that atmosphere with you.
Yes. And there are pilgrim songs and there are pilgrim psalms, so that singing songs as we go on pilgrimage is quite important.
Yeah. And we have the St Cuthbert's Way here, which
we do.
Starts in Melrose, where Cuthbert originally began. And then I think it's a 58-mile walk. So more and more people are doing that.
And we produce a little booklet with prayers and songs and stories of Cuthbert to repeat as you go along.
Yeah.
And it's important to know what you do when you arrive. The Tyne Tees TV did a film on the year in the life of Holy Island, and we said you should do a film on people on retreat. or people who come as pilgrimage, and so they filmed us walking the Pilgrim Way, and we had to visualize everybody getting rid of their excess baggage. I've never taken so many women's handbags in my life before, that I was filmed putting them into the car on the road, and they took off their shoes and walked barefoot. So gradually they simplified their life, and then somebody waved to the mainland and said goodbye.
Right, right.
But then they said to me, but we want you to be Jesus. He gave breakfast to people when they arrived at Galilee, and we want you to wash our feet with warm water and give us a nice drink when we arrive across the other end of the post.
So did you have a barbecue ready?
So I said, for the one and only time in my life, I did have hot water and washed their feet. But that was a beautiful thing too.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
And that whole idea of just letting things go, of simplifying, of leaving things behind, we all need that, don't we?
We do need that.
Yeah,
yes.
So this is part of the journey, and this is part of the waymarks. That's just part of the key lifestyle and rhythms within the community of Aidan and Hilda.
And pilgrimage is we can become inner pilgrims. Bunyan's allegory of the Pilgrim's Progress.
Yeah.
You know, we go through the Vanity Fair, we go through the Den of Lions, and all
it's
our
the
life,
landscape of the soul.
It's the landscape of the souls.
Yes.
So pilgrimage has got to be part of our lives, and the Celtic Christians talked about three types of pilgrim, and one of them was the pilgrim for the love of God, where you lay down your life for another person or another people.
Wow. So this is such a rich tradition.
This is a rich tradition.
Yeah, and there's so much.
And some of it's ruined by commerce, and Martin Luther, we might need him again, because he wanted to stop people selling
indulgences and so on.
at pilgrimages, but those are abuses.
Uh-huh.
So you mustn't let the abuses
so
destroy.
redeem it somehow.
We've got to redeem pilgrimage,
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, well I think that's a taster really, Ray.
It's a taster.
Yeah, so
On
thank
with
you.
the walk.
Yes, so we bless you on your journey.
God bless
and
you.
we will see you again.